You were going to have this when they start, so you're good.
That's what I.
However you want to do it is up to you.
No, I like it up. I like it visible. Hello, Catherine.
It's your guys' meeting. I'm just here to make sure Zoom turns on for us. Okay, we're good on Facebook, or excuse me, on. Oops. Okay, I was hearing myself twice there for a second. Johnny, are we good? Okay, he's starting the Facebook stream now. So I'm going to start letting the people in. So you'll see the attendees list starting to grow here.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we are, Destiny.
Great.
And interpreter, who was the Hmong interpreter again? I'm trying to see who that is on the list here so I can make sure I get it assigned correctly.
I believe it's under Hmong interpreter, Laura.
Okay, I'm not seeing Laura in here yet, so. Or wait, I should go to the attendees list. I'm sorry, I'm losing my mind here. Let's see here. Okay, interpretation has been set and interpretation services have started. So you guys are good to go.
All right. Sophia, do we have quorum?
We would need to take roll in order to determine that.
There's a question before we get started. How do folks register with no email address? How do they get on?
That's a good question. Let me go look. I don't know, to be honest with you. Let me go look.
This meeting required pre-registration at the link on the agenda for members of the public.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I just
and to be honest with you, I don't think you can register without an email address for this type of meeting.
hi. Yeah, this is Gracia. I pose that question because I'm registered under my own name, so I couldn't use my own email address to register someone that we work with who wanted to join. So I'm not, is there something that we can do now about that? But definitely something we should think about in the future of how do we ensure that this is accessible, just because the registration link poses a huge barrier to folks who don't know how to use, technology or speak English, for instance. But yeah, just future reference. But for now, is there any way that I could potentially send her a link? Because I can text her the link and she can, join Zoom. It's just the whole registration and she email address.
Now that the meeting has started, there's nothing I can do for that particular situation. I can't change it to a non-registered meeting once the meeting's already been started. So if they don't have an email address, I'm trying to look right now on the backside of Zoom to see if there's anything I can do now that the meeting started. But once the meeting started, it pretty much locks my hands.
So if I register her with my email address, then would that pose a problem with
You can't
me
hear
being a
me.
panelist?
Going
It
to
probably won't let you. You can
the mom
try,
and
but I
see
don't
if
think
you
it's
can
going to
hear
let you.
mom. Can you? Okay,
I
so
want
I
to
just
thank
want to
the
make sure, can you
public
hear
for
me?
being patient while we
You can hear, so
troubleshoot
thank you.
some of our tech
5%
challenges.
5%다
And if you have
네,
your,
할게 다시 나.
you want to mute your microphone.
더 내우시는데. 오케이, 급부진하고 다시 나. 오케이, 맞잖아.
Hi, yes, if you want to mute your microphone. There's feedback for those that are on the line. All right, so I want to thank everybody for joining us today. It is now 4 p.m. And we'd like to welcome you to the City of Fresno Anti-Displacement Task Force meeting, February 23rd, 2021. And just so everybody is aware, we do have translation services available in Spanish and Hmong and other languages as requested. And so if you need to troubleshoot it all with the Zoom, we have the channel available for you. This meeting will have simultaneously interpreting. So you're welcome to comment in your native language, and we will get that translated for you. All right, next slide. So this is our agenda today. We will now move forward with our roll call. Sophia?
Yes, give me just one moment, please. I will pull up the roll sheet. And Amber Crowell. Okay. Is Amber here this evening? Not yet. Ana Lilia de Alba. Debbie Darden.
Present.
Morgan Doisaki.
Present.
Grecia Elenes.
Here.
Robert Fuentes.
Present.
Catherine Forbes. Catherine Forbes, I thought I saw her.
Her mic might be muted.
Maybe she is muted. Catherine, yeah, you're muted, but I see you there. Okay, I see she is present. Sal Gonzalez is absent. He let me know before the meeting that he would be unable to attend. Hilda Lopez. She's absent. Chair Payne, you are here.
Yes, present.
Preston Prince was unable to attend, I believe. And do we have our alternates here? Sherayla Nicholson? Artie Padilla? Okay, our alternates are not here. We do have a quorum, however. 6 is a quorum, and I know we have 6 members.
All right. Thank you for that, Sophia. And just so everybody is aware of who is staffing our committee this evening and who is on this call providing technical assistance, will you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Certainly. I'm Sophia Pagalatis with the Planning and Development Department. And we also have we have Gavin with our Information Services Department helping us at the controls. And Courtney, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Courtney Espinoza for Transform Fresno.
Excellent. Thank you. And we have our special guest this evening. Before I move into our agenda overview, I did want to recognize them, and I'm sure that they'll take a point of privilege during their presentation, but Dr. Thomas.
Hi, everyone. Really excited to be here to reach this, what I think is a joyous milestone in our work. I'm looking forward to sharing what we have for you tonight.
Excellent. Thank you. So now we'll move into our overview of the agenda. We will be moving into approval of our summary of our September 21st, 2020 meeting. Then we'll slide on down to our task force business. And before we approve the agenda, we're going to move agenda item number 5 towards the end after our Q&A, or after our Q&A. And so I'll make a formal motion and I'll look for one of my colleagues on the Zoom to approve that as we make that small change. And then we'll have a presentation from the Thrivance group, which is really exciting because it's been a long road and we're so excited to finally be here and hear the research and the data in summary, and then we'll give the public kind of some of what will be our next steps. And we want them to continue to engage in this process because we want to give a gentle reminder that this is not the end of the road, and we have a little more ways to go. And so we are certainly going to need the public's input and feedback as we continue with this process. And then we'll go into Q&A, and then we will have our next steps, and the task force will decide when our next meeting will be, and then we'll have unscheduled oral communication from members of the task force and from the public, and then we will try and get you out of here to your families at a respectable time at 8 p.m. So thank you, and let's move to our next agenda item. Can I get a motion to approve our summary? Is that correct, Sophia? With changes, and I think the only change is that we are moving one of the agenda items, agenda item number 5, further down after the Q&A.
So moved. Debbie Darden.
Is there a second?
I'll second. Robert Fuentes.
All right, it's been properly motioned and by Debbie Darden and seconded by Commissioner Robert Fuentes. Is all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any abstentions? Any opposition? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you, task force members. And so now we will move into our presentation from the Thrivance group. So I'm going to pass it on over to Dr. Thomas and her team. Thank you, Dr. Thomas.
Thank you very much, Chair Payne. I just want to make sure I have the ability to share my screen. Looks like
Yes, you should.
do. Okay. Great. And can I get a verbal cue? Is everyone able to see the screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. So we made it, barely. And I want to say thank you before I even go into this presentation, because as a former resident of Fresno, someone whose personal life was transformed in a positive way by the city of Fresno and the residents there. It was a complete honor to spend the last year, some odd months doing the work that we did. I'm very proud of what we've come up with as an organization. For those of you who may be encountering the Thrivance Group for the first time tonight, just briefly, we are a for-profit urban planning firm that works in the interest of racialized people. Displacement avoidance, anti-displacement work, anti-gentrification work is a huge part of our core values. Our organizational virtue is dignity, and we worked really hard to make sure that this process was full of dignity. So tonight, what we would like to do is share with you pretty much an invitation to participate in a deliberative process. What we mean by that is we have a very lengthy document full of policy recommendations that we think, that we know based on our research and data analysis will help, will begin to stop the really hemorrhaging of residents that we've observed even on the ground for the last 12 months. The policies vary in terms of their complexity, in terms of their likely impact. And so the document is comprehensive and outlines not just the policy recommendations themselves, but our recommendations for implementation and prioritization. So I'm going to spend some time today walking you through the outline of the document. We're going to go into some detail about what is proposed and included in the document, and then we're going to cover how we would like you to participate in the formal deliberative process for hopefully getting the city of Fresno to commit to adopting all, if not some, of the recommendations. How we got here. So we believe in dignity, as I mentioned before, and we have a proprietary method called the Dignity Infused Community Engagement Model. Sometimes we call it the process, sometimes we call it the plan. But we know dignity and engagement and community are always there. So we started this project with the assumption that we would be taking on a very focused and targeted assessment of the Southwest Fresno area, specifically for the purposes of creating recommendations that would lead to sustainability and equity in the various projects, development, and in infrastructure investments that are underway in the Southwest Fresno footprint. What we uncovered very early in our process was that not only was there a need to intervene or to recommend policies that could be adopted later on down the road, but that there was a need for immediate intervention, right? And so we were faced with, the Thrivance Group was faced with a dilemma where we had to decide what the best leverage of our time, our resource, our intelligence would be, so that we weren't showing up in Fresno in a transactional way, right? So there is a great deal of distance between what we were contracted to do and what we set out to do, because we wanted to make sure we were honoring the work that came before us, lifting up the voices of people who time and time again shared with us that they felt that they had been alienated and silenced. And we also wanted to shed light on the legacy of harm and the existing and ongoing displacement burden that the entire city of Fresno is grappling with, and that these situations are having a gravely disproportionate impact, especially on the residents located in the Southwest Fresno project area. Some of the things that came up for us as we began our engagement process were the literal discourse that the city of Fresno had around the community and the residents who lived in it. We found planning documents, some old, some current, that used disparaging language to describe the residents that lived in the communities. We experienced a number of challenges accessing accurate data as well as comprehensive details about plans that were underway or that could be underway in the area. And so what was unique about this project for us was that in real time, while residents were sharing their stories with us about the legacy of planning in Fresno, we were also experiencing some of the harm that they were so adamant about making sure we documented, right? And so it's important for me to begin tonight's conversation being very transparent about that. Those of you who know me or have at least heard of my work know that I believe in that type of transparency. And there is no amount of money that would cause me to cloak in any way that type of reality on the ground. So we were able to move and pivot quickly from just doing sort of a touch and go, fancy research project to really taking the time to sit with community, hear stories, and investigate, right? Investigative analysis of how we got to where we are today. So this is a little bit about the footprint that we covered. This is in no way a claim that we have spoken to everyone. We have not. I personally feel that the constraints that we were under, given the limitations of COVID-19, in addition to the nature of the subject matter at hand, I had a desire to reach many, many more people in a much more meaningful way. Yet and still, I do feel very proud of the reach that we were able to make. So, as I mentioned before, we had to pivot, right? So we actually created a strategy for pivoting and adapting to the circumstances that we were facing during social distancing, as well as, again, just the literal on the ground trauma that we would encounter when we would try to do community engagement. We also found that the nature of ongoing displacement happening in the area meant that the demands coming from community members were evolving quickly, constantly evolving. And one day we could go to a business or to a house and have a deep conversation with someone. We would come back and visit the next month and maybe they wouldn't be there, right? Or I remember when we did our social climate analysis, one thing that stood out to one of our observers was what felt like an inundation of furniture dumping and U-Haul trucks lining streets really early in the pandemic. And so I think it is a testament to the dedication of Thrivance Group staff. Certainly this was not an effort that I would have been able to take on independently. So I'm also grateful to the city of Fresno for having the flexibility and the willingness to take on our whole team and not just me as a researcher. To that end, we did send out over 20,000 mailers over the last year. It was very piecemeal and ad hoc, but that was a internal target that we met. We also hand delivered through our own staff as well as partners on the ground, 7,500 flyers to residents to participate in the various meetings and workshops that we had to come up with the recommendations that are in the report. We made 1,250 phone calls to encourage people to participate in the process. We've had over a combined 200 hours of FaceTime with residents who wanted to make sure their voices were heard. That happened both in person and through virtual mechanisms. I think we conducted more than 50 interviews, but we pulled data, meaningful data out of 50 interviews. And those interviews included both city staff, high-level stakeholders, and of course, community-based organizations and residents on the ground. And we made a special effort to reserve a percentage of our interview space for residents that had never before interacted with Transform Fresno or were averse to or unwilling to participate in civic engagement within a planning process because of past harm. We also conducted over 400 billable hours of technical research. We worked way more than 400 billable hours, but we did have 400 billable hours of technical research. So I'm very proud of the work that we've done, although I know that there is much more work to be done. One number that is not captured here is the work that went into facilitating transformative justice spaces with residents on an on-demand basis, on an on-call basis. So these were hours that were slightly resourced, but definitely not to the extent that we were willing to sit and work through the legacy of harm and to attempt to resolve conflict in a justice-oriented way, and under the guise of confidentiality. And we also feel very honored and proud that we were able to hold space with folks to do that. So I cannot thank you all enough, not the city of Fresno, but the residents of Fresno, for trusting us with this important work. We take it very seriously. As I mentioned before, we've prepared a package of policy recommendations that we would like the community to review in detail, that we would like as many residents as possible to review in depth and to provide feedback for us. To that end, 15 or 10 or even 20-minute presentation will definitely not do that report justice because it's very long. But what I will do is go over a snapshot of what is captured in it. I will walk you through how to navigate the document when you receive it. And I will also talk about what our vision for next steps are on this project and through this deliberative process. So the document has 8 sections in it. We start off by giving a background and justification for the work. We then transition into our snapshot of current conditions, which is a combination of our summary of observations from our social climate analysis, as well as some data we were able to pull regarding existing risk factors for displacement burden in the area. We then were able to create a section that focused on what we're calling risk focus areas. This is not a geographic delineation of areas. This is actually populations that we found were disproportionately more likely to be experiencing displacement burden. We then created what we call intervention bundles. So we did an analysis or a case study analysis of what other cities with similar geographic typologies and in similar stages of displacement risk or gentrification risk, and saw that there were thematically commonalities across municipal regions or jurisdictions in terms of the types of policy recommendations or implementation that was happening to curb displacement and gentrification in communities that were experiencing or about to experience an influx of infrastructure investments. We created those categories and then filtered our analysis and our recommendations through those bundles. What I think will be very helpful about this report is that we took this a step further. And so within each intervention bundle will be a substantial list of recommended policies to meet the objective associated with that intervention bundle. But then you'll also see the socio-political and business case that we've made based on our risk focus areas. So the risk focus areas will create continuity throughout the document to help residents understand. Perhaps you may be a member of one of the risk focused areas, which we will go into in a moment. And so you can reference the document by just looking for your risk focus area and seeing which policy recommendations we have made to meet your immediate needs or long-term needs. We've also included a section at the end of the document that we're referring to as our prioritization analysis. Because this is so comprehensive, it was important to me to also have an analysis regarding what should come first and why. I'm going to talk a little bit about that today. And then we kind of wrap up with implementation guidance. So As a social justice oriented organization, it is not enough for us to do the work and hand it off. We want to be accountability partners in this work, and we also want to be held accountable for the full implementation of it. So we see ourselves as long-term partners in this, and we have our own vision for what we think implementation and adoption of these policies should look like. You'll then see a section with references and tools, which I'll review in a moment. And then you'll see our vision for participatory adoption. In our background and justification section, there were 3 core areas that we highlighted as being sort of the underlying pillars or inspirations really behind the here to stay blueprint for displacement avoidance in Fresno. The first motivation was that we really wanted to recommend policies that would actually and in fact in the existing cycles of displacement that we're currently experiencing in Fresno. The second motivation was that we wanted to address the legacy of racial and cultural alienation. We encountered a lot of incidences of cultural and racial erasure, both in the data as well as in official city documents. And so we wanted to frankly create a document that made people who've been erased historically by planning exercises feel seen, feel proud, feel acknowledged, and also our third motivation to create an official archive of that humanity, right? And so the archiving motivation is about leaving behind a document that promotes sustainable action and strategy, not just for the city to hold on to, but for residents at multiple levels of stakeholdership to carry forward in partnership with the city or not. This is not the full list, but some of the topics we covered in the background and justification section through these motivations was the legacy of hostile land use practices. If you've seen me present in the past, you've heard me talk about the chronological timeline that's available and like readily available, easy to find online, that really depicts how different racial groups were introduced into the city of Fresno, and how the city of Fresno historically has had a hand in not just hostile land use practices, but creating contention within those and between those communities when it comes to the land, when it comes to access to planning processes, and when it comes to infrastructure investments. So we talk in depth about that. We also talk about the deprioritization of quality of life in current and historic investment priorities in the city of Fresno, as well as across the state of California. We recognize that a lot of what we do at the local level is driven by what's made available to us by the state. And so we wanted to make sure we properly attributed accountability for that. There are many examples in Fresno of intentionality around actually prioritizing quality of life. But the policies that we currently have, both locally and statewide, aren't really serving and meeting the needs of the communities that are experiencing displacement. We're going to talk about the perception and fact of ghettoization through investment. This was actually something that I have studied in other geographies, but was actually very skeptical of when in earlier stages of our community engagement, when residents would describe the ghettoization of Southwest Fresno, like through the influx of affordable housing and the way space was designed. I personally thought that was like a politically motivated ideology, but through our research found that there are some hints at maybe not intentional, but impacts that have resulted in the ghettoization through investment in Southwest Fresno. We also talk about operationalized dehumanization. I spoke about that a moment ago, but I used to be a city planner. I used to be a civil service employee, and I know what it's like to have to write a planning document. And oftentimes it's like, we're talking about this neighborhood. So you go and you copy what we said about this neighborhood the last time we wrote about it, and you paste it in your document, because when you use the boilerplate version of the language, it's not subject to the same type of review processes, and you just know it's not going to be an extended process for getting things moving through the pipeline. And so what I suspect is that we are just holding on to language and practices and traditions that are outdated, yet still harmful, and that it needs to be pointed out. So we pointed out in this document. We, as I mentioned many times, are going to talk about the erasure and missing legacy data. There's a significant amount of data available to us that talk about the deficits in Southwest Fresno and communities like it across Fresno, but not as much data talking about strengths-based features or characteristics of these communities. And when that type of legacy is missing from documentation, it is difficult to plan projects and to prioritize infrastructure in a way that builds on that positive legacy of the community. So we point that out as well. We talk about intra-community deficit dynamics, what happens when a community is subject to scarcity over a long period of time, and how we feel or how we've observed this play out in the Fresno, in the city of Fresno. And then lastly, in the background and justification section, we talk about a multilateral failure to make an equity-centered business case for the types of projects, the types of investments, and the type of policies that would really cure the issue of displacement in the city of Fresno. What I mean by failure to make an equity-centered business case is, I experienced this too as a business owner, being so rooted and so invested in the grunt work, the minutia of the work, wanting to really just be on the ground and do the work, forgetting to document the process, and therefore being less competitive amongst my peers, in this case, amongst the city of Fresno's peers, and on stages where we're competing for millions, if not billions of dollars. We haven't properly documented our work and made the case for the viability and value of investments in Fresno. So that is what you'll find in the background and justification section. Please let me know if I'm coming on a time limit, approaching a time limit. Then in the section regarding current conditions, there were 3 core observations that we zoom in on. Those are pervasive and active displacement. This is where we saw literal signs and symbolism in the built environment of rampant displacement and active displacement happening. We also documented what we call a friendly environment for speculation. So signs posted, advertisements posted, very clear willingness to invest in the upkeep and viability of some businesses versus others, brand new housing adjacent to vacant lots, things like that. Those are all friendly and things that create a friendly environment for speculation, which in turn causes displacement and other types of cultural harm. And then the third sort of current condition that we zoom in on in the report is an inability to meet the demand for access. We know that not just in the case of Fresno, but as displacement is a new focus area, a lot of the resources that have been made available to cities and to counties to protect residents and to keep tenants in place, they're there, but we don't have the systems and the operational infrastructure to connect residents to it. And so what we've experienced or what we've noticed is a bottleneck in terms of distributing and folks accessing the resources that actually are available. Some of the other things that we cover or within these focus areas in the current conditions section are not just that folks are being displaced, but that displacement isn't being tracked. And that's a great concern for us, because if one of our motivations was to stop erasure and stop silencing in the planning process. And so it was disheartening to see displacement happening so quickly and to not be aware of, maybe there's something we're not aware of, to not be aware of a mechanism for tracking who's leaving, who is at risk of leaving, where folks are going, and whether or not they'd be willing to come back. We also talk about COVID-induced displacement, which actually might be one of the cases if there were intentional partnership with healthcare providers in the area who are, I think, legally mandated to track COVID incidences. I think there is opportunity to partner with the public health sector in the region to get a greater understanding of how many people have been displaced or are at risk for displacement because of healthcare related disparities. And I think that is where a lot of hope resides, or hope exists there in that focus area, because we can track folks down and create incentives and pathways for them to return home. We also talk about disproportionality as it relates to the extent of burden. What is also unique about Fresno is there is, for the most part, a commonality in terms of the type of displacement burden that folks are facing, but the extent of that burden is showing up excessively and differently for those communities of people that we talk about in our focus areas, which I'll go over in a moment. One thing that was odd to us was that we sensed that there has been an expedited development process or development processes underway, despite the fact that we're experiencing a pandemic and people literally and functionally won't have access to civic engagement regarding those development processes. So that was a concern, and definitely something we want to lift up as a contributing factor to, at the very least, anticipatory displacement. Two more things in the snapshot section. Well, I just mentioned strained civic engagement opportunities. We struggled with this, and I feel like I'm the queen of engagement. But we've been really limited in this way. We as an organization, as well as those of us who do this work more broadly. And so what that means for us is that the timeline for civic engagement on all things that require civic engagement should be extended so that we can reach as many people as possible. And then lastly, we observed a lack of resource pooling and coordination among direct service providers, not because of an unwillingness to collaborate, but because, again, the operational infrastructure is just not there for folks to have a broad perspective of where the need exists and how to get it in the hands of people who need resources efficiently. Let's talk a little bit about our risk focus areas. Another way to put this is communities or residents that are experiencing a deeper impact than others. And so we gathered this from a couple of things. We gathered this from archival analysis, reading newspapers, following social media, eavesdropping on next door conversations, on the ground engagement. But many of the call outs that I'm going to go over here come from direct engagement that we've had with residents and community-based organizations on the ground and in the project area. One thing that we heard consistently was that certain groups felt like they were intentionally being targeted for displacement. Certainly these aren't the only two communities that expressed that, but we found that aging adults as well as people with disabilities were more likely to experience this type of targeted vulnerability for displacement. So those, for example, when you get the document to review, Those are two focus areas that you'll see show up in the policy bundles under each section, where we have done an analysis of what the impact of that recommendation will be, in this case, for example, for aging adults or people with disabilities. Another common point of feedback that we received was folks felt like they had to leave Fresno, like if they were ever to attain financial stability. I empathize with that. I think that was a contributing factor to my having to leave Fresno. The people who were most likely to express this were young adults. By young adults, I actually mean older teenagers through the age of 28. And also people returning home. What I mean by people returning home are people who've been institutionalized either through the criminal justice system or through the mental health system, feeling like because of their circumstances, because of their challenges with these institutions, there weren't opportunities for them in the city of Fresno, either to maintain and retain housing or to maintain and retain the type of employment that they would need in order to keep dignified housing arrangements. Another common point of feedback that we received was that there's, I feel like across the board, city staff as well as residents, landlords, the perception, probably true, that landlords are taking advantage of folks' vulnerability, both now, but even prior to COVID-19. But the people who expressed this the most were people with documentation challenges, as well as veterans and farm workers, or descendants of families that were in farm working. Another comment or theme that came up for us was a fear, a valid one, that generations of legacy were being erased, literally through the emerging planning exercises in the various project areas. Again, multiple communities express this, but the two groups of people that express this most frequently were third generation Black households. So households that have been in Fresno, Black households that have been in Fresno for 3 or more generations. Excuse me. As well as Southeast Asian residents. The reason and mechanism for the erasure of legacy showed up differently for both of those groups, but the interventions that we think will help cure that type of harm apply to both circumstances. Then we heard that civic engagement as well as competitive bidding opportunities are not accessible. I'm using the term accessible loosely here. Of course, I think as we've even noticed maybe on this call today, there are literal accessibility challenges, right? People who don't have access to technology, people with disabilities for whom technology is not the best point of contact, but also what feels like to some residents a deliberate intention to cloak or to be passive about opportunities to be civically engaged or opportunities to do business with the city. We heard this from community advocates, which surprised us because most of the community advocates that expressed this concern were community advocates that actually do have contracts with the city. So I thought that that was a very transparent observation coming from them. But we also heard it from a whole host of entrepreneurs, particularly those entrepreneurs who are Black, those who are also aging adults, and those who are small businesses. Now let's talk a little bit about our intervention bundles. There are 8 of them. We've changed the number. We had 12. I've been working over the last few days to truncate the report so that it's more digestible for folks. So now we have 8 intervention bundles. Those are community ownership, accountability and transparency, socially responsible development practices, connectivity, which is a new one, alternatives to eviction, legal mechanisms and land use protections, direct services, dignified housing with legacy considerations. So what I mean, again, to reiterate by intervention bundles, is we have taken these categories to organize our entire list of policy recommendations that we are making to the city of Fresno. So if there is a specific area of interest that you have, for example, we know that there are folks in this space who are very interested in freedom of movement and mobility interventions. We've created a section for that. And if you are a member of one of the focus areas that we just went through, you will find yourself visible in every single intervention bubble. We only have time to cover a few. Again, this is a very long report. We have a ton of recommendations. So I'm going to cover the ones that we've received the most feedback about and the most inclination toward. So the first one is community ownership. These are going to be policies that focus on giving community members more control over the land and infrastructure itself, as well as control over the development processes in their neighborhoods. So again, this is not the complete list of policies that will be found in this section, but these are the ones that were most consistently requested by residents. So we have community land trusts listed, but through further investigation, what we found is it's not just that folks want to see CLTs implemented, but that they want the technical assistance and the initial investment and that type of technical support to have viable and successful community land trusts. So we have some policy recommendations for that. We also got several requests for community-owned civic engagement processes, which I thought was a really cool idea. Folks want to be civically engaged, but because of the legacy of harm in the city of Fresno and across the region, there's a desire to have the city consider what it would look like for the city to have like a sanctioned body that manages civic engagement that has bearing and weight in our planning processes. So we have recommendations for that. We have recommendations for all of these, so I'll stop saying that. We also have here in the community ownership section a set of policies that will help local workers have more prioritization in job creation in the city, closer to the areas that they live in, regardless of if there is transportation infrastructure in place. I say that because a lot of times we do the cart before the horse argument and we say, oh, before we can focus on job creation, we need to focus on developing the transit or transportation infrastructure for folks to get to it. And I think that what that happens is it causes us to continue to kick the can down the road in terms of economic justice. So we have some very specific policy recommendations regarding that, as well as local living wage minimums and recommendations for how we redefine what a living wage is in the city of Fresno, given its land use structure, as well as its geographic typology. We saw a lot of requests for community-based organization investments, officially included in the city's budget process. So we have a set of recommendations for how to do that. I just said I was going to stop saying we have recommendations. We had an idea, a couple of people with the idea of what to do with vacant land in the city of Fresno. So a process by which we would transfer that land if we found there was negligence, either intentional or through inability to maintain the land, transferring that land to people who currently live in the community and who are ready to maintain and develop it in an equitable way. And then chartering empowerment, which is similar to the community-owned civic engagement, but really amending the city charter or governing documents to expressly delineate how we are empowering residents and what the policies and regulations will be for civic engagement and resident empowerment through land use and urban planning practices and processes. We're only going to go over 3 of these categories. As you can see, it's extensive. So the next one that we're going to go over is accountability and transparency. These policies will focus on how to centering how the city interacts with developers And it will also have policies that will help us regulate transparency for potentially impacted residents. So examples of this are displacement impact reports, non-standard ones. So displacement impact reports created by people who actually live in the impacted area, with less emphasis on the written word as an academic or as a professional, and more emphasis on the value of lived experiences of the residents who are at risk, and formalizing that in our processes. We also have a recommendation for penalties for failure of developers, even if the city is the developer, to honor the community benefit agreements set forth in the funding mechanisms that are allowing them to develop in the city of Fresno. We have expanded notification mandates. So we already have some interventions in place federally, statewide, and locally that mandate how we are to notify residents of changes coming to their communities. We have recommendations as to how to expand them, given the challenges that we ourselves encountered and the challenges that residents have expressed they've encountered routinely in the city of Fresno. We have a recommendation for voluntary inclusion of displacement analysis in any CEQA processes. In addition to an inclusion of displacement analysis, we're also asking for voluntary inclusion of impacts to the cultural makeup, the cultural face of a community. This is something that has been litigated in court before, not in the city of Fresno, but I remember researching that litigation while I was a planner in the city of Fresno. And unfortunately, because of the case that was put forth, all of the elements that needed to be there weren't there. And so we weren't able to get cultural makeup of a community, cultural face of a community as an environmental factor, but that doesn't stop local jurisdictions from doing that work anyway. So we have a recommendation for voluntary inclusion of that. We have a recommendation for access to public record of land use archives. I think sometimes what we do as city planners and civil service employees is we work really hard to, I guess, gatekeep to make sure that the information we're sharing with the public is what we think is accessible. And we make a lot of incorrect assumptions about folks' level of intelligence, level of education, willingness to sit with dense information. And so we redact things and we get in the way of having transparency in our work. So for example, we had to do some tracking down of shape files to get a sense for past and current development happening in the Transform Fresno project footprint. But there are some jurisdictions in the United States that have an entire info hub dedicated to making sure every granular level of detail regarding land use and planning efforts is available for people to access, and they don't make judgments about whether or not folks will be able to digest it. So we have some guidance for that. And then lastly, not lastly, but what we're lastly covering today on this subject is a dedicated evaluation and technical assistance department. What we observed with that was that there are actually really great concepts and ideas and protections even coming out of City of Fresno employees' offices, but that one of the barriers for folks is the need for support in the evaluation, justification, and technical department to really build the case for those ideas, and to also help get those concepts implemented in an equitable way. So we have guidance for that, not necessarily policy recommendations, but guidance. I think this is the last one. Yeah. So the third one that I'll cover today with you is dignified housing with legacy considerations. These are policies that both seek to affirm the humanity of people in the different types of environments that they choose to live in, but also prioritizing and privileging really the legacy that these residents have in the community. So going back to what I said about, third generation Black folks and descendants of farmers, especially Black farmers, feeling like they've been alienated in planning exercises. There is a way to incorporate additional incentives for folks who are living in Fresno, investing in Fresno, and developing in Fresno, and have a legacy of identity and connectivity to those communities. Some of the things that are included in this section are recommendations for conversions, expanded conversion restrictions. We're seeing alternative types of conversion pop up, so we'll talk about that in the document. Incentivizing eviction mediation. We know that there are some service providers in the city of Fresno that are currently and have in the past been intermediaries to try to help residents and landlords resolve various eviction related concerns. We think that the city of Fresno should formally incentivize the use of these services so that we can start to slow the rate of displacement and eviction that's happening in Fresno. One of my favorite policies is a right to return policy, which will require extensive research to identify who needs to return and where folks are. But right to return policies exist in several places in the United States. I think one of the most successful implementations of that has been in the city of Portland, Oregon, which is notoriously known for not having so-called any Black folks. There's a legacy, there's a reason for that. And the city of Portland has a right to return policy that pretty much incentivizes and pays for multiple years of living expenses for residents that can demonstrate a legacy in Portland and are looking to return to that area. We'd like to see some anchor institution protections. When we talk about what keeps folks in place, we do focus a lot on the structure itself that folks live in. Maybe we talk about the mobility infrastructure adjacent to it, but we rarely talk about the institutions that are truly anchors for the families that live in these neighborhoods that have been disinvested in. And so having protections in place for folks, for example, if there's a restaurant that we know residents that are part of one of our focus areas prefers to dine at, there should be added protections for that because we know that that's a huge part of residents being able to remain in place. I think more seriously, there are special institutions, museums, art centers that are at risk of being displaced themselves. And I'm not sure that we've considered the impact that that will literally have on residents' ability and willingness to stay in Fresno. We have recommended an informed livability loophole. This lends itself to our notion of what makes a dignified housing situation. And we know that for those of us who have been subject to various types of deficit and really oppression generationally, some of us are grateful for the housing that we have that maybe a city code would not define as habitable. So we have recommendations for case-by-case analysis to make sure that folks aren't losing access to housing that is an important stepping stone for them in their journey toward ultimately the most dignified housing alternatives. And then lastly, we have some design guidance. There's a lot of back and forth, a lot of ideological difference across economic status, across race, across gender, you name it. There's a lot of debate around what the best type of housing development would be in these areas like Southwest Fresno. Should it be single family housing? Should it be multi-unit housing? Should it be low income? Should it be affordable? And I think a part of that is because of how these different typologies are literally designed. They trigger memories of very specific types of harms in the past. I think we can resolve some of that disagreement through implementing different kind of design when we do develop these affordable housing projects in the city of Fresno. The next section of the document, and I'm almost wrapping, I can't see the comments, so please verbally interrupt me if I'm going over my time. The next section of the document is a prioritization analysis. So done all this work to recommend these policies, it makes sense for us to now provide guidance in terms of what we think should come first, what we think could come last. Also, we found through our research that many of the policies we're recommending will be ineffective and really not a good use of resources unless they are adopted and packaged with other policies that we're recommending. So we will outline those instances in the document for you as well. We also think that some of the policies that we're recommending will have, a significant amount of political will, an available funding mechanism, and could lend themselves to achieving immediate relief in the Fresno area. So we have some phases that we've identified for the entirety of the recommendations that we have in the document. The sort of process for making, for creating this prioritization analysis has 4 parts. The first part was, okay, so who's most at risk of being displaced? We factored in geography, we factored in disproportionality, and we also looked at the extent of the burden and the length of time that these folks have been experiencing this burden. That's our number 1 consideration when it comes to prioritizing these policies. The next thing is what the implementation mechanism and political will look like, right? So we know who we want to help first. Then we want to do an analysis of what kind of help will be the easiest to get to them or most efficient way to get to them. The third consideration is, does this recommendation or package of policies within this prioritization or order, the sequence, serve a function of atonement? There's a legacy of slavery and racism in the city of Fresno. And we feel that as we consider these policies, we should also think about which of them contribute to an intentional act of atonement for those harms. And then lastly, but also important, is which of these policies are easier for us to build a business case for, not necessarily for the purpose of implementation solely, but for the purpose of implementation to build a case for more investment for similar types of equitable development practices. The next section, and I think I'm getting close to the end of the document, is our implementation guidance. So we will have shown you what the priorities are. Now we want to give you some marching orders, right? So phase 1, whose job should this be, right? For example, in phase 1, in our prioritization, we want to identify whose job it is to move that phase forward. We want to identify, if we can, we weren't able to do this in every instance, but if we can, we want to be able to identify how these prioritization list of prioritized policies will be resourced or funded, who will be accountable for them, what the role of advocacy groups and coalitions could be in making sure the implementation is equitable and expedient. And then lastly, in our guidance, we talk about what we think the appropriate community engagement strategy will be. Because even though we've done a thorough job of engagement, we're about to enter a public comment period. For each policy that is implemented, it will need its own community engagement process. So we have recommendations for that. We've summarized this in 4 direct actions, 4 steps, this is the beginning of, or the precursor to the 4 steps that I'm about to list. So when you receive your full document, you have 30 to 45 days. I will yield to city staff at the end of my presentation to make that determination. But you'll have a formal public comment period where you can provide feedback on the recommendations that we've made, and that feedback will be reviewed and considered. The second action, which is coming up, is that we are going to host a workshop for City Council. We're actually going to go over pretty much what we're going over with you now, with a little bit more information included there. And then the next step after that is to deploy engagement and participate in listening tours, right? So we don't just want you to submit a comment, If there is discourse and conversation that you want to have, clarification that is to be made, we want to create pathways for you to participate in that way. And then our last action, which will be triggered by you, the community, will be to either or all reject, modify, adopt, and advocate for some, all, most, hopefully, of the policy recommendations in the document. The last section of the document will be our references and tools. It's a long document, and so we want to give you tools that help you digest the information, but also tools that help you carry the work forward, even in the event that Thrivance Group, can't facilitate this process in the long term, which is our intention. But in the event that something happens, we want to give you tools to be partners with us in advocating for the full adoption of these policies. And so you'll have, again, the full-length report with all the justification included. You'll also get a quick reference guide, which those of us who do research will know as an executive summary. And we're working on getting that in an accessible format for you and truncating that down to, at the most, 2 pages. You'll get an advocate's guide to full adoption. So special nod to those of you who are on the ground and doing this work long before I was even born. We have some strategy to offer you and partnership to offer you. And then lastly, we have what we're calling an all hands on deck public comment engagement plan. This was something that we are still expanding on and wanted to be really intentional about. And so we've been having conversations about this even as recent as last night. But all in all, our vision for participatory adoption is that we want to ensure that there's maximum engagement and deliberation regarding everything included in the document. So we need help. This means making your listservs available either to the Thrivance Group or to the city of Fresno so that we can reach folks, supporting as phone bankers, or at least sharing your phone banking list so that we can call folks and have human interaction with them, get their feedback and input. Also, we want to tap into any existing engagement touch points. We know there are many of you who are currently still doing mutual aid work, those of you who are essential workers, some of you just love community engagement or maybe provide a service that's essential. And we want to plug into the work that you're doing so that we can reach more folks. We want you to consider being someone's eyes, ears, or voice. There are a lot of people who, even with our best efforts, for many reasons, will not be able to access this process. And so if you know of someone, in addition to bringing it to our attention, if you would so kindly help us and convey what their feedback is to us in the best way that you can, that would be tremendously helpful. And then lastly, in each of us, an organizer. So every time you come across a community leader, an elected official, a city staff, a fast food worker, ask them, hi, I come here often. I've never heard you mention the here to stay public process or public commenting period. What's up with that, right? So we want to create a buzz. There are some things that we're not prepared to present today that we think will add to this engagement process, but I think even if we focus on these 4 areas, we'll have some success and have a truly participatory process. Lastly, I want to leave with some parting words. Not that I think this is the last time we'll talk, but again, this is a very special and important milestone for me and an important milestone for our staff, some of whom have transitioned to other jobs already. It's important that you know that this has been a true labor of love for all of us at the Thrivance Group. We are so grateful to the elders that fed us on 16-hour days of engagement in Fresno, still held us accountable while we were eating our sandwiches. But we're grateful for you and for your wisdom, and to the business owners who even during the pandemic cared for us enough to open their doors to make sure we had a nice margarita and a bowl of soup, even though policy said we shouldn't be doing that. We're grateful for you. To the young people who have been stretched thin and who are bearing the brunt of all of the trauma that we're experiencing. I'm sorry that we have created this environment and this world for you. We do this with you in mind. To the advocacy groups that I know are championing our work and are murmuring about us in positive ways through City Hall and in other spaces, thank you, thank you, thank you. We honor these relationships. We believe they are sacred connections, and we hope that you'll continue to want to work with us, but that you'll also hold us accountable. We love struggling with you. And then lastly, we hope that everyone who's listening tonight and everyone who encounters our work feels honored and seen in it. And you know, my parting words is like, let's just keep going. So thank you. If you'd like to reach out to us, you can reach us at info@thrivinsproject.com. Please have some grace and understanding in that we do get an influx of emails every time we make presentations, but we will do our best to respond to you. And that concludes our presentation.
Excellent. I want to thank you for that, Dr. Thomas, for that wonderful presentation. I also want to recognize task force members Artie and Amber, who have joined us this evening. So please introduce yourselves really quick, and then we will make a transition.
Go ahead, Amber.
Thanks. Amber Crowell. I'm a sociology professor at Fresno State. I'm also the regional housing coordinator for Faith in the Valley. And I'm just joining y'all. I just got done teaching class. So thank you for your presentation, Dr. Thomas. And nice to see you all tonight.
Thank you. Artie.
Yeah, Artie Padilla, Central Valley Community Foundation. I have bad Wi-Fi where I'm at, so no video. So glad to be here. Thank you for the presentation, Dr. Thomas.
Excellent. As we make our transition, staff, to the public, if you have an interest in giving public comment, please do so by signifying the raised hand so we can get an idea of how many people are interested. Again, if you are interested in giving public comment, please indicate your desire to do so by using the raised hand feature at the bottom of the context toolbar of your screen. All right, staff, how many folks do we have queued up?
I see one. Courtney, are you seeing? I see Ms. Michael and Lewis, but there may be others.
I see two, Lisa Flores as well. So we can start with Michael in.
All right, before we open the floor, Courtney, I want to kind of give some guidance in the process to the task force members. We're going to go to the public first for Q&A, and then we will allow task force members. We'll bring it back to the task force for our Q&A with the consultant and the report and any questions that we may have of staff. All right, so we're going to queue it up. Can everybody indicate with a thumbs up from the task force that they heard me and we're good to move forward? Or indicate by saying yes.
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 Yes. Yes.
Excellent. All right, we are going to go out to the public. Courtney, do you have our first public comment?
Yes, it looks like Michael Lynn lowered her hand. So Lisa Flores, you should be able to talk now. Lisa, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, first off, I want to thank you for this opportunity to comment, and that was a very impressive presentation. My only question is, well, I took some medication, so I was kind of sleeping in and out of it. Sorry about that. So I may have missed part, but my question is, what is the possibility of having some rent stabilization policies, and rent control occurring within the city of Fresno and within the southwest area to stabilize not only the rents, but also the community and the cultural groups. Thank you.
Great question. Thank you for asking that question, Ms. Flores. So we did include rent stabilization and guidance for rent caps, and also a redefinition of affordability in the city of Fresno. I can't speak to the political viability of that or the political will, which is why we're putting this out to public comment so that the elected officials in the city of Fresno can see the extent to which their constituents are ready for these types of interventions. But it's definitely included in our recommendations. That was like one of the first policies we recommended.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And then relative to our public commenting process, residents and participants will be given 3 minutes for public comment. Please keep your comments brief, because we do have feel free to maximize your entire 3 minutes. And also for those, because we do have over like 60 folks on the call on the Zoom today. And so we want to be able to get to everyone by the 8 o'clock hour that we've allotted. So thank you for that. And we will go to the next public comment.
Next public comment is Leroy Candler. You should be able to speak now.
Mr. Candler, if you will unmute your mic.
Thank you. I'm sorry. Thank you for that wonderful presentation, Dr. Thomas. It was a pleasure. I enjoyed listening to every bit of it. I didn't have so much as a comment, but I had a question, and that I didn't hear anything. I know I heard it from about project labor agreements, but my concern and my question is what are the plans for encouraging and development young and middle-aged people and the people that will be getting out of jail soon in our community and coming back to our community? Do we put plans?
Mr. Candler?
Yes. I'm sorry. Are you gonna let me finish?
I'm not sure if that's his internet going out or if it's my internet going out, but I am getting it is breaking up.
I think it's yours,
Did
Eric.
you all catch it?
I think it's yours, because
Okay.
I'm hearing you.
Okay.
Okay.
Apologies, Mr. Candler. Apologies. Carrie, continue.
Okay. Dr. Cummins, my question was, what plans do we have, or is it in any of the plans that you guys discussed as far as the people that's in the Southwest area on getting jobs and jobs training, especially for the young people that are not being trained and doesn't have good jobs, for them to be encouraged to want to stay in the community, live in the community? What plans do we have to make sure that they be community bargaining agreements that would include them and ensure that they be able to get jobs and jobs training, and more especially for the ones that were soon to be getting out of jail, that I understand is somewhere near 800,000 people throughout the United States will begin released back into the public. So is there any plans to assist these people in become part of the community?
Great question. One of my passion areas as well. So again, I can't speak to what the city has planned and what their willingness to invest in services will be, but we do have recommendations in 2 of our category areas that speak specifically to the need to not create access to jobs, but to add equity to processes around existing job creation and existing opportunities to do business with the city, as well as in the category that we have regarding dignified housing. We have some recommendations for people who, that's what I meant in the presentation by people who are returning home from being institutionalized. So one of the policies that I had a hand in working on in the Bay Area was of course I'm gonna forget the name of it now, but was the fair chance housing policy, where we were able to get legislation passed in a couple of cities in Alameda County that made it so that landlords could not consider criminal background as part of consideration for eligibility for housing. So we've included fair chance housing as a recommendation here. But I think programmatically and in terms of direct service provision, that is something that should probably be lifted up to multiple people at the city of Fresno. And I'm not sure that our work beyond just recommendations will get us to immediate relief on that issue.
But is there part of your team that people like myself that's involved with this type of training, jobs and activities, and as well as the expungement program that we can team up with to make it be more profitable for these people?
I mean, we're open as an organization to having conversations with folks and exploring opportunities to partner and to build coalitions. We, you know, just to set expectations on the work that we've done, we were brought on as researchers to make policy recommendations. We added a layer of social justice analysis and advocacy to that. So we're here to advocate in partnership with you, but we ourselves are not service providers and have not been given resources to distribute or to create processes ourselves in any way. We have only been empowered to make recommendations.
Thank you.
And those that you are lifting up have been included to a certain degree in our proposals.
Well, as you know, many of them that's returning home, they can't even get a place to stay because they have a criminal record. They can't even rent an apartment. Anything.
Right. I'm so aware of that, and that's something that's close to home for me.
Okay.
Thank you for that, Mr. Candler. We'll take the next public comment.
There's nobody else punched up yet. Oh, Janos Paulus. Go ahead, Janos.
Hi, Mr. Janos.
Mr. Janos, if you can unmute your mic.
How about now?
Yep, go ahead.
All right, thank you. Good evening, Dr. Thomas and everyone. It's more like a comment. I'm thankful to be part of this process. That's why I do the work that I do on the ground with veterans. Thank you for discovering that. A lot of them get evicted, and let's find a way to help them. I'm committed. Thank you very much. God bless you.
Thank you, Mr. Yanis. Next public comment.
Olga Moya.
Go ahead, Olga, if you could please unmute your mic.
Hi, good evening. I just had a question in regards to what is going to be the plan for helping the homeless people here in Fresno?
Yeah, direct service delivery is not something that we have been given capacity to really speak to. So I'm sure there's someone though on the task force or on the Zoom that can speak to that directly.
We'll pass it back to staff. Sophia or Courtney, would you like to address that?
Hi, this is Sophia. And yes, we would be happy to, you know, although the city's homeless program and plans isn't the subject of this meeting, we can definitely connect you with our homeless initiatives project manager, H. Spies. So we'd be happy to have him follow up with you. And we have your email information. So would that be adequate, Olga?
Olga, you have to unmute your mic.
Yes, sorry. Yes, that will be fine. Thank you.
Okay, we'll follow up.
Thank you, Olga. We'll be sure to circle back with you. Thank you for your comments. Next public comment, Courtney.
There's no one else punched up yet.
All right, we will do a last, best, and final for the public. If you have an interest in providing feedback to the report presented by the Thrivance Group and Dr. Thomas. Is there anyone that has punched up, Courtney?
Yes, Kyle Lopez Schmidt. Go ahead, Kyle.
Mr. Schmidt, go ahead and unmute your mic.
Thank you so much. My question is on kind of the applicability to citywide and any consideration on, I know there's the TCC project area, but has any thought been put into how this might apply citywide?
Yes, great question. Our entire investigation and analysis was expanded to citywide scope, like within the first 2 weeks of us signing the contract. The reason for that is the nature of displacement is such that if we were to focus just on Southwest Fresno, it would be difficult for us to capture the needs of people who've been displaced from Southwest Fresno and are now located in other areas of Fresno. So all of the recommendations that we are putting forth, we're recommending that, of course, they have they especially are beneficial to the populations that are living in Southwest Fresno, but we are recommending that they be applied to the entire Fresno jurisdiction. That's the only feasible way to adopt these policy recommendations.
Mr. Schmidt, did you have any other questions? You still have time left.
Sure. I guess the follow-up would be in kind of more opportunity neighborhoods where there aren't a lot of low-income residents or diversity, people of color, how this process might be different in trying to more diversify and be more inclusive in neighborhoods.
I think some of the tenant protections that we're recommending, as well as some of the affordability modifications that we're recommending, and maybe some of the dignified housing policies we're recommending, might lend itself to folks having the means and access to move into maybe neighborhoods that they weren't living in before. But our goal on this project was not to create pathways for people to move to neighborhoods that aren't, the ones that they want to be in or the ones that they historically have lived in. Our goal was to, why we titled it Here to Stay. Our goal was to create opportunities for residents to remain in place as they need to, right? So before we can think about like voluntary migration across the region, we have to think about people who are being involuntary displaced. And so that was the focus of our work.
All right, thank you for your comment, Mr. Schmidt. Next public comment.
Kimberly McCoy.
Ms. McCoy, go ahead and unmute your mic.
Hi, thank you. Beautiful presentation, Dr. Thomas. I've been attending your meetings that you've been holding with the community, and it has been very, very informative and very, very well attended. And again, I just want to thank you for that. My question is to the city. I know there has been a lot of recommendations put up to be implemented, and I am just asking, like, I don't know if you guys will be able to answer it right now. I don't know if this is the appropriate place to answer it, but how much funding is allowed for the city to be able to take some of these recommendations and start implementing them? That's my question.
Dr. Thomas, did you want to speak to that?
I definitely can't speak to it. I can't speak to fiscal commitment on behalf of the city. That hasn't been communicated to me, although we are prepared to do an analysis of opportunities that we recommend the city go after that they haven't already, funding that they haven't already procured. I know that there's a lot of speculation around what is being made of the substantial amount of resources coming to Fresno because of the COVID relief packages. But again, we encountered a great deal of challenges with transparency, and so we weren't able to track that. But perhaps someone at the city can
Thank you for that.
We are making the economic business case for our recommendations, though.
Thank you for that. Courtney, did you want to give a timeline of an account of this process and the financial resources available?
At this point, we haven't seen the report yet, so we're not really prepared to talk about the fiscal responsibility for that. The TCC has funded Dr. Thomas's work up until the end of her contract and up until this point too. So at this point, that is all I can say. Again, once we receive the report and we're able to talk to the administration, then we can get a better feed on that.
Thank you. Sophia, are you able to speak to that from anti-displacement task force position relative to the sunset of TCC fundings available for this process?
I think Courtney said it really well, that, you know, we need to look at the report, and then, you know, the city council will ultimately decide what their priorities are, and then funding would be looked at that time. So just in a general sense, that's what I can offer right now.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Ms. McCoy, did you have any other questions? You have a little bit of time left.
Yes, I do, because I understand Dr. Thomas' work has been extended to do a citywide displacement, anti-displacement program for the city, as well as for her contract through TCC, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm quite sure there's some type of allocation for that, because she was just contracted to do the TCC, but it has been extended. So is there any money allocated right now before you have, and will there be any money allocated anymore after you see the report?
To my knowledge, there hasn't been any more funding allocated to Dr. Thomas's contract. She does have a contract with Transform Fresno for community engagement, data and reporting, but that is a separate contract related to the displacement avoidance plan.
And for clarity, you're referencing the implementation, correct, of the policies that are being recommended?
Correct. Because these were a lot of good policies that Dr. Thomas and her team put up front that we can currently start implementing. So just would like to know the pot of money that's going to be used to start picking out some of these things, because I know realistically, everything is not going to be done. But just to start seeing what's going to be done, what's not going to be done, so I can start building my advocacy around that, because this is something that needs to be implemented citywide, especially in Southwest Fresno.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And we will round out our next person as the last comment. Do we have somebody queued up? Thank you, Ms. McCoy.
Yes, Michael Lynn.
Michael Lynn, if you want to go ahead and unmute your mic.
Okay, I'm unmuted. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Thomas. That was a really good presentation. I can tell that you put a lot of hard work into that report. Just quickly, in your presentation, you did mention about housing in Southwest Fresno and what the preference would be as far as low income, affordable, so on and so on. That's a subject that comes up, and usually what the result is some low income multifamily units are put into West Fresno, and it seems like we're going to be labeled as that particular type of area of town. And I'm wondering if there's a way that you could, or there could be a way to emphasize single family market rate homes to be a preference, especially for those people who you might want to recruit to return home again or return to the area. I forgot the term that you used. So would that be something that would be possible to make that at the forefront of the housing element there? Thank you.
Hi, Michael Lynn, Miss Michael Lynn. So we did not take an ideological position on what type of housing should exist in Southwest Fresno. The reason for that is because we truly believe in self-determination, and when it comes to self-defining what a dignified housing means to each individual or to communities. What we have done was an analysis, we've completed an analysis of the reasons why the conversation in this region of Fresno is like sticky when it comes to this. And it's a historical analysis. And so while we did not put forth a concrete recommendation for housing typology, what we are putting forth is design recommendations, because what we think is happening is there is a long-standing tradition in land use and housing planning that causes folks to characterize and think about certain types of housing as less valuable or less desirable. And I think it has a lot to do with our over-reliance on the way we've made things look, frankly, in the past. We just kind of keep, doing the copy paste with housing design.
Right.
And so maybe it's still low income multi-unit, but does it have to look like what Ronald Reagan gave us? So we have some design recommendations, not policy recommendations for that.
Okay. Sophia, just quickly, Sophia, is there a way that we can add that or start making that something in planning?
Michael, and are you talking about better design for housing?
Yeah, kind of both. I just see that, almost daily I have to pass by a couple of huge complexes that have been put in on Southwest Fresno. And they are, as Dr. Thomas said, very cookie cutter. So that even when you put multifamily housing in, multifamily complexes in, they still look like something that, what they call tiki-taki boxes or something or another. So it just, to me, puts another label, because in about 10 years from now or so, those buildings are going to look like they need to be demolished. I can tell you that right now. There's nothing they'll be able to do to make them look nice or like they're brand new or anything like that. So I'd really like to see that type of design go away and maybe be a little more innovative if we have to put in multifamily housing.
That's an excellent comment, and I'm going to have to cut you off there, Miss Lewis.
Oh yeah, Eric, do that, okay? Because you're always cutting me. No, I'm kidding.
And we do want to let the public know that they can submit public comment to the city. And I want to give a friendly reminder to the public that there is a public commenting period that will be 30 days. And I will let Dr. Thomas and city staff kind of give more details about that. But before we go into that, we will circle back and allow them to express what that process looks like and where do we go from here relative to the public to continue to engage in this process, because your input is valuable to this process as we elevate and lift this work up. And so now I want to center my comments back to the task force for their questions. So I want to open the floor up to task force commissioners, to Dr. Thomas, and to city staff. Is there anybody in the queue? Please, city staff, if you could help me identify task force members as they unmute their mics, because I don't want people, we want to have a one mic rule so people are not talking over each other. All right, so commissioners.
We can't hear you, Catherine. No, I feel like I can read what you're saying, your lips really well, but we could not hear you now.
You have to unmute your mic, Dr. Fords.
Make sure you don't have a Bluetooth earbud connected to your computer somewhere. I usually make that mistake.
All right, we will circle back to Dr. Forbes while she figures her mic system out. All right, so we'll go to the next task force member for public comment. And please be mindful to unmute your mics, commissioners.
Gracia has her hand up.
Go ahead, Gracia.
Hey, good evening, everyone. And again, just as everyone, I'll just reiterate what everyone said. Dr. Thomas, very much appreciate the presentation and all the work you and your team have put into this. You know, can very much tell the dedication y'all have in here. And again, thank you to the public for all your comments. Very much appreciate that. I think one I really want to echo is from Ms. McCoy around what seemed like the implementation phase of this, of the displacement avoidance plan process is a result of the Transformative Climate Communities program. So, wanting to ensure that we are adhering to those guidelines and requirement from the state to ensure that we do implement, what is requested of a minimum of 3 new policies and programs. So, I'm sure that you will include that within your, recommendation and your proposal, Dr. Thomas, but I think this is more so, for I know most of this is going to probably go before the council, so the staff's hands may be tied on here, but I do just want to reiterate that that is something that is a requirement from SGC, the Strategic Growth Council, who is administering this grant. And so I hope, the council, the mayor, it really takes this seriously and really, looks onto these recommendations, which were so well thought out and so much time and research and, as much as on the ground engagement that could be done during this time, that, this is like a once in a kind of lifetime opportunity that we get such a great report. So I'm really hoping, our elected leaders really look to this so we can start moving forward and really start stabilizing our housing and providing quality housing for all Fresnans throughout all of Fresno. So, whether you want to live in West Fresno, Northwest Fresno, everyone should have that option. So again, thank you, Dr. Thomas and your staff for this great work.
Thank you.
And just by way of background, Dr. Forbes did post in the comments. She said she would put it in the chat. She said, Dr. Thomas, would you kindly describe how the public comments are incorporated into the document?
Yes. So with the help of the city, we're going to open this up to a formal public comment period. I think our recommendation was 30 days. Once we explored the need to do sort of a collaborative all hands on deck approach to engagement, the recommendation was expanded to 45 days. I will let someone from the city comment on that length of time or what decision was made regarding that. But I will say that although our technical time on the contract ends at the very last day of March, this is why we are making haste to release this document on the 1st, which is Monday, to open the public comment period up to make it available in the various places where public documents are left for access by the community. And then we will not do on the ground engagement during that time, we being the Thrivance group. What we will do though is provide the city with recommendations for what they can do for community engagement. And we are happy to provide technical assistance and oversight for that. However, we do feel that part of the requirement of completeness for this report is that we do consider and incorporate every comment that we received during the public comment period. So as those comments come in, we will work with the city to have someone sort and file them. And then toward the end of the public comment period, we will begin to make an analysis of them. And where we are able to incorporate the feedback or make modifications, we will do so. But regardless of the number of comments we receive or the number of comments result in substantial changes to the recommendations, the public will receive a memo from us summarizing the comments, the amount of comments we receive, the high level categories that those comments fit into, and any changes or infeasibility in terms of feedback or recommendations that have been made by community. And then that will be how we sort of close out this phase of the project. I hope I answered that.
Gracia, are you there?
Yes, I'm here, but I think that was Dr. Forbes's question.
Oh, okay. Yes, that was Dr. Forbes. You're right. Sorry. And so to that, I would just like to add a couple of different things, right? So you really laid out a concrete vision, and you shared a lot of historical data relative to systemic racism, institutional racism. And I think that we are all on this Zoom call really invested in this process. And there's a deep-rooted commitment to, from both city staff on this call, you as our consultant, and those residents and community leaders that are present today. There's a deep commitment to seeing this work to fruition. And I recognize that it's been a complicated marriage between the Anti-Displacement Task Force and the TCC process that has continued to sustain your work to this point. And I think we heard from community who expressed deep concerns about what this looks like going forward, and how do we begin to look to its implementation around prioritization. And one of the things that I heard you say specific to the disproportionality as it relates to the extent of burden, Dr. Thomas, you made a profound statement where you said where a lot of hope resides. And I guess my question for city staff is, where does the money reside going forward? Courtney, I think your mic is muted, or Sophia, your mic is muted.
Like I said before, at this point, we can't answer that question because we haven't even seen the report yet. And so we really need to look at that report and kind of digest it along with the community. And so unfortunately, I can't answer that question because I can't commit money that I don't know about. So my apologies.
All right, thank you. Sophia?
Yes. Oh, here's my video. I don't really have anything to add to that, but I do have a slide coming up that talks about kind of next steps and process if we're ready to go there.
All right, before we make the transition, I do want to give, I want to put that in a parking lot and just share that there's a deep concern there. And so as we look to the future, if it is not relative to the implementation and success of this process as we finalize this document, I think that community will be very alarmed when we talk about keeping folks in their homes, and when we coin the phrase "here to stay." I think that we need to reevaluate that conversation at a later date as we do look to future meetings, and take a deeper dive into it, because I think that it's unresolved at this point. But I definitely want to take it back to my fellow task force members. If you have other questions or concerns that you'd like to express, go ahead and queue up your raised hand, and we will. Oh, I see one already. Amber, go ahead and unmute your mic.
Yeah, it's actually just, I think it's a pretty easy question. So this work's amazing, and it's especially impressive that y'all did so much with, dealing with COVID. that I'm sure made everything way more complicated in terms of engagement. And I think, as you've said, Dr. Thomas, it's really important that we keep up the engagement during the public comment period. So to kind of help that process, is there an easy way to find the report when it gets shared so that we can share it out with folks where I haven't heard yet, and I keep coming in late, so I may have missed it, where people will be able to find the report when it does go live?
Yeah, I think the very first place that that document will be available is the Transform Fresno website. In full transparency, the engagement process for public comment, that conversation we just had last night. And so I think there are still some decisions to be made. In any event, the Thrivance Group is committed to having the full document available on the 1st. One of the obvious shortcomings will be that with it being currently I'm not even telling you how many pages it is currently, but the page number goal we're getting to is 200, and there needs to be translation. And so my concern is the staggering of access to the document for people who speak languages other than English. And so for that reason, I would hope that maybe we can extend the comment period out a little further. But from an engagement standpoint, I literally will have to rely on the city to support the recommendations that we make for the engagement process. I know that there's an email address that folks can send comments to, but I mean, naturally we have ideas about how to make this more accessible. I feel like I can't commit to anything though.
I definitely want to, maybe from the lens of the task force, offer a recommendation to city staff. I know that in the past, I've seen the city issue public notices through the utility bills, whether it be the water bill. I've seen partnerships with Fresno Unified School District through their parent notification system to issue these types of notices, whether it be around the importance of the vaccine or other public interest areas relative to the city's work. So to that end, I would offer a partnership with another public agency, whether it be the air district, the school district, the utility department, to bring notice to the public about this document. Because I think that there needs to be an all hands on deck as we seek to engage the public, but recognizing that there are limited resources available to us as a task force around the idea of public engagement and access, and we want to make this one of the most accessible documents for public comment that the city has issued, because this work is historic. This work is monumental, and this work will be generational. And we want to ensure that families are aware of this and that they have an opportunity to provide feedback. I'll allow city staff an opportunity to comment at this time.
Yeah, like Dr. Thomas said yesterday, that all was discussed yesterday on the call with the Anti-Displacement Task Force Subcommittee. And so we're looking into any resources that we can utilize.
Can I make a suggestion? Is my mic finally fixed?
Yep, go ahead.
Sorry, I feel like an idiot. So there are 59 participants on the call. Dr. Thomas and Thrivance are going to present to the City Council on March 4th. I think we should show up virtually. I mean, I think demanding more resources to Ms. McCoy's question before, and also to Mr. Payne's point as well, is like the City Council is about allocating the money to both continue the work of the anti-displacement work that Thrivance Group is doing, but also showing a commitment to really putting into place some of the policies and the seriousness of people that we have about this work continuing. So I think that, there's a public comment period on the city council meeting. We can all show up and talk and make brief comments about, supporting this particular work. So.
Absolutely. Are there other comments? I see a raised hand from Debbie Darden.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Thomas. The question I have is, the TCC had put this task force together to put in a placement for anti-displacement. And this was just presented to us, the work that was done by the Thrivance group. And so now that this is being put together and it's got to go before City Council to get voted on and adopted. And now we're hearing now that they're not sure on what monies are available for this policy. And if I'm saying that wrong, please correct me. So once again, it seems like, something that wasn't here, because there was a lot of people that was on edge when we found out we had to create this task force to get some policies implemented for the TCC. And so now that was presented, now we add a halt again, because now that we want to push forward with what the Thrivance have come up with, now we don't know what available monies are available. So if it comes to where there's not any money available, what happens to all this work that's being presented?
So for clarification, the Anti-Displacement Task Force was created through the housing element, not through TCC. Also, the workshop that's going to be held on March 4th for the City Council is a workshop only. There's no adopting, there's no voting, there's no nothing. It's just an informational workshop to start the conversation. So I just wanted to clarify those two facts.
So that's to start a conversation in regards to what Dr. Thomas Nim has just presented to us. Is that correct?
Correct.
And how long is that workshop is going to take, presenting that with City Council?
However long Dr. Thomas would like to present on.
Okay, and so if it gets adopted, where does the funds get allocated from to keep it going? Where, if it's not TCC, who is it? Is it the City of Fresno?
That's a discussion that we still need to have. The start of all of this was waiting for this report and waiting for those recommendations. And as we work through finalizing the report, we'll have discussions and conversations about how to move forward, either through the Anti-Displacement Task Force or from whatever means possible. So those are all conversations that are still to be had. This is, like Dr. Thomas said when she opened up, this is the start. This is the start of all that. So I assure you, we will have those conversations though.
Okay, I'm looking forward to seeing what Sophia Pegalatos and them have going forward. What's the next step? Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments from other task force members? All right, hearing none, we will transition to new business and task force, new business for the task force on our agenda, because that's one of the agenda items that we moved to the bottom. So after hearing the presentation from Dr. Thomas and the Thrivance group, relative to the things that we have digested today, where would the task force like to dig in at, or what would you all like to see happen in further down the line?
This is Debbie. What I like to see is what's the next step, because as Sophia, if what the standpoint right now of what they're saying is funds and then going to the next step to make sure that city council is on board with this, or to make sure that this report is really something that's accepted, because you're hearing a lot of good comments coming back. So I'd like to see what the city has next for the next step, so that we know how this is going to roll out according to Sophia Nim after this presentation was presented.
Okay, in the form of a formal motion, I would like to offer that executive committee issue a letter to the mayor's office and to city council, expressing some of the concerns that we heard tonight from the public, and that we heard from other commissioners, that will go out on behalf of the task force. Is there a motion to accept the recommendation to move forward with a letter to city council and to the mayor's office from this body?
Debbie Darden, so moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, it's been properly first and seconded. Motion to approve, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any in opposition, please signify by saying nay. Hearing none, any motion to abstain? Hearing none, motion carries unanimously. Staff, do you have direction on what the next steps will be relative to the task force and new business? Happy to provide clarity at this time.
Chair Payne, are you wanting to move to the next steps item of the agenda?
Yes, we can move to the next steps.
Okay, great. Thank you. Let's see if I can get my PowerPoint to work. So here is a draft next steps, kind of the pathway of consideration of the report. We expect to be able to release the report ideally on March 1st. I would say first week of March, and we are going to release it for a 30 to a 45-day public comment period. On March 4th, the City Council is going to consider it or really hear it all for the first time in a workshop. Then it is our suggestion that if the task force wants to deliberate about the report once they've seen it, and hear more concerns from the public, et cetera, begin to prioritize policies. Staff can support by helping to set up a meeting on Tuesday, March 23rd, which would be a month from now, for the task force. Then perhaps another meeting in late April or early May of the Anti-Displacement Task Force, in which the task force could review the public comments that were submitted in writing and continue with policy prioritization. And then in May or June, that would be perhaps the time that the task force could make its recommendations to the City Council on anti-displacement policies. So this is just a proposed outline by staff on a potential pathway here. And I know that folks are anxious to know where can they access the document once it's made public. It will definitely be on the transformfresno.com website. So that's what's listed here first. You can also email your comments to transformfresno@fresno.gov. this is a phone number that's specifically dedicated to Transform Fresno and would take any phone comments. Or you can send written comments via US mail to me in the Planning and Development Department. Courtney and I, work for the same department, so we coordinate on these items. I think I'll stop there. Questions, concerns, comments?
Can I say something? This is Morgan with Central Fish in Chinatown. The letter that is being written, what exactly is that to be still a part of the anti-displacement or part of the TCC or transform? Can you get some clarification on what was just voted on?
Yeah, so it will be a letter to City Council and the Mayor's office expressing concerns that we heard today around continuing this work, Morgan, and ensuring that we have the necessary funding to move forward with implementation. And Executive Committee will articulate much of what we heard in the position of other task force members today to embody a full one voice document to our city leaders.
Thank you.
No, thank you. If there are no other questions, we have our timeline relative to next steps. Please take a screenshot of this so you all can be aware. Is there a way, Courtney or Sophia, that the public can access this information in this timeline, in this presentation that we had today?
Yes, there are a number of ways. Courtney, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we can post the PowerPoint on the Transform Fresno website and also on the Planning and Development Department's website. But also there will be a link to this webinar. It'll be posted on YouTube. Is that right, Courtney?
That's correct. And we'll post the recording on the Transform Fresno website to refer back to as well.
Excellent. I think we will now move, if there are no further questions, and if all hearts and minds are clear, we will move forward to unscheduled oral communication. Sophia and Courtney.
I have nothing for this item. Thank you.
Neither do I.
All right. If
Actually,
all
Eric, I'm sorry, but I realized, yes, I do. There are some questions in the chats, in the Q&A, that I think we need to answer. And I apologize. I was going to highlight these sooner.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Can I just, I'll just go through these and read them. So the first one is the Section 8 going to bring back the program that helped people buy a home? So the city of Fresno has various housing programs, and the home buyer assistance program, I would need to check specifically to see if that is available. The comment was made anonymously, so I'm not sure how I'm going to contact this person. Let me move on to the next one. Was there a specific dollar amount to be used specifically in the Southwest Fresno zip code 93706? I think perhaps Courtney could answer that better than I, but certainly the the funds that have been allocated to do this anti-displacement work so far that the Thrivance group has done have been paid for by TCC dollars, and those dollars are focused in Southwest Fresno, Chinatown, and downtown. So Courtney, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, that's correct, Sophia. There was nothing specific allocated to the zip code 93706. There was money for this work allocated to the whole Transform Fresno project area. Like Sophia said, that encompasses Southwest Fresno, parts of downtown Fresno, and all of Chinatown.
Okay, and then I see a question from Michael Horn. Sorry, I haven't been reading the participants' names. From Michael Horn asking about federal grant funding, which I assume was made when we were having the funding conversation. And our response would be that, once the, if the council, however they act on this report, when they do, that I'm sure that all funding sources would be considered, federal, state, local, whatever's available. And a question, this one is to Destiny, and perhaps Destiny is answering, looks like she's typing an answer. Shelby Stamp says, hello everyone, great presentation. My question is, what has been the biggest issue in regards to redlining, gentrification, and what can the community do to help get rid of that issue? And I would say that the report that's coming out is a response to that concern. We know from Lola Whittle, not all residents, she says that not all residents have access to attain the document online. Ms. Whittle, if you wish to call the phone number that we've listed, we will find a way to get you a document that you can access. Let's see, Lola Whittle also asks about providing information to the city council meeting. We can do that. Perhaps Courtney, we can post the time that it's going to be heard on March 4th. Do we know the time? Is it a timed item? Do we know yet?
It's not a timed item. I'm still trying to get some information because sometimes the agenda is a little bit fluid this far out, but I anticipate it to be the first part of the afternoon. It could be earlier, but I anticipate it to be around 1 or 1:30.
Okay.
But that's not set in stone.
Okay, and
can I add to that? Sorry, can I add to that? So, but that may not be when they take public comment. So I think it's just once the agenda goes up, I dropped the link for the calendar for the Fresno City Council meeting in the chat. Once that link goes up, once the agenda goes up, you can see when the time period for public comment may not be right after the presentation.
Right, that's true. And actually, if it's depending on the type of item, they may not take a lot of public input at that point, but that's why the public comment period is going to be scheduled, and then it will come back to council at a later date. I see one last question from MJ Williams. She or he says, thank you. Are there any council members who have committed to partner with the task force to present the items for implementation to the council for voting and adoption? I think it's too early for that at this point. Right now, this March 4th workshop is going to be the council's, really their introduction to this material. So any partnering or any support that the council wishes to do would occur after they become familiar with the the report and the recommendations. Those are all the questions I see. Are there any other questions before we wrap up?
Oh, I'm sorry, I was muted. I didn't see any in the chat and I didn't see any in the Q&A.
I think we have answered all the questions.
Yep. All right. Excellent. And so with that being said, if all hearts and minds are clear, we can prepare for adjournment. Task force members, I want to thank you for your time and your commitment to this work. Dr. Thomas and the Thrivance Group, I say we have a deep appreciation for you shining a light on a number of historical injustices, but not only that, the remedies and solutions that are available to our local municipal government to steer the ship in the right direction and create a safety net for all residents in the city of Fresno. And to the public, thank you for dedicating your Tuesday evening to listening and sharing and participating in this process. But I'd like to share a deep appreciation to the city staff who have helped marshal us down this road. Courtney and Sophia, while I recognize this process is new for many in our community, you have been good stewards in recognizing the issues and the gaps that exist and done your due diligence to get questions answered and resolved. And it has been a pleasure to work with you all. This is a monumental and historic night for this community as we move into the commenting period and the release of this document for the community to review. And so with that, thank you for your time.